Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about science. A number of these signs have popped up around my neighborhood. We believe Black Lives Matter, no human is illegal, love is love, women's rights are human rights, and science is real. The implication of this sign is that they believe that their neighbors don't believe that Black Lives Matter or that science is real, because otherwise there'd be no reason for them to put the sign up. When someone has a sign like this up in front of their house, you can be pretty certain that they are a left-wing Democrat. Having spent most of my life around left-wing Democrats, I know where they get their news from. It's places like the BBC. Climate change, summers could become too hot for humans. Pretty funny that they would publish this article in the middle of the cold, wet summer which the UK is experiencing. And given the fact that Phoenix, Arizona is the fastest growing city in the United States, I'm having kind of a tough time believing this headline. Another favorite news source of left-wing Democrats is the New York Times, who are again saying today polar bears could become nearly extinct by the end of the century. Polar bear populations are way up over the past 40 years, but I'm always hoping that the New York Times will be extinct by the end of the year. Another favorite news source for left-wing Democrats is PBS, and they're featuring Dr. Fauci saying, "We have got to do the things that we need to do to turn this around. When you do it properly, you bring down those cases. We've done it in New York. New York got hit worse than any place in the world, and they did it correctly." What on earth is Dr. Fauci talking about? New York sent thousands of sick people into nursing homes and created the highest death rate in the world. Dr. Fauci calls that doing it correctly. What actually happened in New York is that they did everything wrong and the virus got completely out of control. And back during March and April, most of the people in the city got exposed to the virus. As a result, most of the people in New York City now have some immunity to the virus. The virus is having a harder and harder time finding people to infect, so the infection rates are dropping. This is called herd immunity. And not surprisingly, as the infection rate dropped off and the government stopped infecting nursing homes, the death rate has also dropped off sharply in New York. It's pretty astonishing that Dr. Fauci, who failed to tell New York not to send sick people to nursing homes, now says they did it correctly. What New York did was a complete catastrophe. They created the highest death rate in the world, but they did achieve herd immunity. At the other end of the spectrum is Sweden, which has also achieved herd immunity, but they did it at 1/5 the death rate of New York City. Sweden never locked down, they never closed their under 16 schools, they never closed their restaurants and bars, they never closed their borders, and they did everything they could to avoid violating human rights. They used an actual science-based approach because they had a good scientist directing their policy. All of these locations marked in red had lockdowns and had higher death rates than Sweden did. New York City, New Jersey, New York State, San Marino, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Belgium, the District of Columbia, Louisiana, Andorra, the UK, Michigan, Spain, Italy, Illinois, and Maryland. This graph shows daily deaths in Sweden going back to the beginning of the epidemic. They had a big spike in March and April when they didn't do a very good job protecting their nursing homes, but they got that under control, and since then their death rate has dropped off sharply and now is close to zero. Like New York, Sweden has achieved herd immunity because the virus is having a difficult time finding new people to infect. But Sweden did it in a relatively organized, science-based fashion, and they did it without creating the mass carnage and chaos which occurred in New York. Sweden accomplished this without lockdowns and without wearing masks. Just like the other Scandinavian countries, hardly anybody in Sweden wears masks. However, there's still lots of true believers in masks out there, including many governments. So let's compare how Scandinavian countries like Sweden, who don't use masks, are doing compared to some states which are using masks. These Scandinavian countries have their schools open and they're pretty much done with the virus. But in New Mexico, they have a mandatory mask rule and cases are skyrocketing there. And the same thing is true in California. They've had a mandatory mask rule for the past month, yet cases are skyrocketing. For some reason, Dr. Fauci wants everybody wearing masks, even though there's little indication that they're effective. And just a few weeks ago, Dr. Fauci said that people should not be wearing masks, and he gave a good explanation why not.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course.
Dr. Fauci's positions have been very inconsistent since this epidemic started, and he's shown little signs of competence. It's very unfortunate that the United States does not have a good scientist in charge like Sweden's Anders Tegnell, who says the world went mad with lockdowns. But the problem is not just in the United States. Policy in the United Kingdom is also being driven by junk science. Like New York and Sweden, the United Kingdom is very close to herd immunity. The virus is having a difficult time finding new people to infect, so their infection rates have dropped way off, as have their death rates. COVID-19 deaths in the United Kingdom are dropping off rapidly towards zero. So how is Boris Johnson and the UK government responding to all this good news? Well, they're requiring that everybody wear masks starting Friday. What the UK government is doing makes absolutely no sense. Science is very real. The problem is that most liberal Democrats and many governments don't understand what science is. They conflate science with propaganda from people with an agenda. And that's where Toto comes in. His job is pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda. Please visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com.